Okay, so today we're going to learn about solving algebraic equations. Before we begin, here's a quick review of some of the properties that we've learned about. We learned about the commutative property that states that we can move terms around. Okay, there's the commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. We also have the associative property. That just means that the numbers can associate differently, but we'll still end up with the same end result. There's one for addition and for multiplication. Okay, the identity property just states that when a 0 is added to A, it's still going to equal A. There's the multiplicative one that says that if A is multiplied by 1, it will still be A. The inverse property is just the opposite of, so our goal is to get 0. It's kind of like the opposite of the identity property. And then there is a multiplicative one. All right. Now the distributive property states that when anything is in parentheses, just means that it is that this term outside multiplies to each term on the inside. That is our distributive property. Okay, the vocabulary that we're going to go over today, we have 2 vocabulary words, and sometimes we tend to get these confused, so I really want you to write this down and make sure that you understand the difference. Our first vocabulary word is evaluate. Now, when we evaluate something, we just plug in a value for our variable. So we're going to take this expression right here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. We're going to take this expression right here, 2x plus 1. Okay, number 7 asks us to evaluate 2x plus 1 for x equals 3. All that means is that we're going to plug in this 3 value where our x is. Okay, and if you remember, this 2x is just 2 times x. So that's why I wrote it this way, 2 times 3. So I'm left with 6 plus 1 and 7. Ta-da! I have successfully evaluated this expression. Now I'm going to show you how to do number 8. We're going to walk through it together again. So we're using the same expression, but instead of x, I'm going to plug in a -2. Ta-da! Now I want you to try to do number 9 on your own. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and pause now so that you can work on it. Okay, now we're going to talk about the vocabulary word solve. To solve something means that we set our expression equal to a number or another expression when we get to our 8th grade math, and we try to isolate the variable to figure out what it equals, okay? This is what we often think of when we say solve or evaluate, but it's just solve is the correct term. So here is our goal when we're solving an equation. We want to isolate the variable. So if you write one thing down from this section, I want you to write variable on one side equals numbers on the other. Okay, our whole goal is to get the variable all by itself. So here are some instructions. First step, you need to simplify each side of the equation. So if we have parentheses or exponents, we need to take care of those to simplify them. Step 2, we're going to move, notice this quotation marks, the non-variables or all of our integers to the right side through the inverse operation. Okay, really quick operations. The inverse of plus is minus, just like how the inverse of minus is add. Okay, so the inverse of multiplication is division. The inverse of division is multiplication. Oops, these are my inverse operations. Okay, so my third step is to completely isolate the variable through, again, inverse operations. So let's go ahead and let me show you what this looks like. I have 2x plus 1 equals 5. I am going to draw a line down from the equal sign. I just do this so that I remember what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Okay, now I'm going to talk, there's our first step, simplify each side of the equation. Well, for this equation, we're simplified down to the smallest variable and the smallest integer. So I don't have to do any more simplifying. Step 2, I want to move the non-variables or the integers. So here's my variable. I'm going to keep it right here. I'm going to move anything that is not part of my variable. So I'm going to subtract 1. Now remember, my whole goal is to make zeros and ones on this side so I can get my x by itself. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I have 2x equals 4. I'm going to do the same thing through my inverse. This is 2 times x, so I'm going to divide by 2. So I get x equals 2. Okay, we're going to do it one more time. Okay, my goal is that I want to make this 2x plus 0, so I have to do the inverse operation. The inverse of positive 1 is negative 1. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Okay, now this is 2 times x. Do the inverse operation of multiply, which is divide. I divide by anything that is attached to my x. If this were a negative 2, I would want to divide by negative 2. But since it's a positive 2, I just have to divide by positive 2. Okay, so now I have x equals 4. Now I want you to try to do number 12. If you want to pause the video so you'll have time, now would be a good point. Okay, I'm just going to show you a few examples. Okay, so I want to keep my variable on this side. I'm going to move everything else. So the inverse of negative 5 is positive 5. That creates a 0. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So now I have 3n equals 7 plus 5 is 12. Okay, the inverse operation of 3 times n is division. So I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides, and I end up with n equals 4. Okay, here's this one. This one might seem a little tricky, but if you remember from last time, there's a little tiny ninja invisible 1 right here. So negative 1 times x over 4 is just negative x over 4. I'm going to show you how to completely get rid of everything that's connected to our x using the inverse property. Okay, so if you remember, 1 over a times a is 1. We want to try to get a 1 next to our x. So I'm going to multiply this by whatever is in the denominator, or not x. So I'm going to multiply this by 4. So, and I do not have just a plain 4. I also have a negative tacked onto my x. So I'm going to multiply by a negative 4. This is like saying negative 4 over 1 and multiplying straight across. I'm going to show you this. So negative 4 times negative x is just 4 times x. And 1 times 4 is just 4. That would be like, oh, and I also have to multiply by negative 4 over here. Okay, so you see how I have this 4 in the numerator and denominator? I can simplify that. Ta-da! down to just x. So x equals negative 8 times negative 4, which is a positive 32. Okay. Let's do one with the distributive property. Okay. Distributive property says anything right outside my parentheses, I have to multiply into each term. So 2 times x plus 2 times 1 equals negative 8. This is 2x plus 2 equals negative 8. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw my line. I'm going to do the inverse properties. I'm going to subtract 2. Now I'm left with 2x equals negative 10. Going to divide by 2. So now I have x equals negative 5. Okay, this next part, this is part of the in-class activity that we did today. Okay, it will be new next time. All you have to do is, it has some student work over here and they made a mistake. So all you have to do is explain the mistake that they made and do the correct process. Okay, so let's walk through this together. This says negative 6t equals 30 divided by 6 on each side. Well, if they just divided by 6, they would still have a negative t. So they actually need to divide by negative 6. So the explanation of the mistake, they forgot to divide by negative 6. Okay, so the correct solution, I'm going to show how to do it. You divide by the negative 6. So t equals negative 5. Okay, let's go ahead and do the second one. So it looks like they multiplied by 3/4, but if we were to multiply straight across, that would give us 9/16 x, which doesn't clear out the fraction, okay? So instead, they needed to multiply by the reciprocal. So they didn't multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, so if you remember the reciprocal of a fraction, so say we have 3/4, the reciprocal just gives me a 1. So I would flip the fraction to 4/3. We can check it to see if it's the reciprocal. If 3 times 4 divided by 4 times 3 equals 1. And of course, it does. So this is really 12 divided by 12, and it equals 1. Check. Yep, that's my reciprocal. So now I can go ahead and solve. Okay, so now I'm multiplying by my reciprocal. That becomes 1x equals 12 times 4 is 48 divided by 3. It equals, actually I could go like this, 16. All right. So you have the rest of this page and the back page, so it should be about 2 pages long. All you have to do is explain the mistake that they made and show the correct solution. Also, do not forget your Delta Math homework as well. It should only take you a few minutes.